By way of introduction, my name's Lieutenant Patrick Omodei. I'm currently a platoon commander with the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment. So I began my time in defence in early 2019 and marched out from the Royal Military College early in 2020 due to COVID. After graduating into the Australian Intelligence Corps, I began my regimental training with the Royal Australian Infantry Corps. On completion of Corps training, I then marched into the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, which was then deployed to Melbourne on Op COVID assist. So in late 2020, the battalion returned to Townsville, and from there I took up a position as the 2IC of Support Company, which was an excellent exposure to the battalion's specialist capabilities. In mid-2021, the platoon commander of Recon and Snipers promoted and moved to Charlie Company. From there, I took up the position of Recon and Snipers platoon commander, which was an exceptional experience, allowing me to develop further as a first-year lieutenant. So throughout 2021, 3RAR had done training that culminated on Talisman Sabre as the ground combat element. A Recon and Snipers platoon had been focused on amphibious operations in support of the battalion's mechanised capability. So in addition to the individual readiness required for C-Series and as part of the Ready Combat team, the battalion had an exceptional culture of maintaining readiness down to the lowest level, down to the individual that is. As a practical example of this, we had in the back of our minds 1RAR's non-combatant evacuation operation in Afghanistan. We understood that the Ready Combat team could be called out on short notice to complete complex tasks. So the Regimental Officers Basic course taught us the introduction to infantry operations. The Mechanised Regimental Officers course I relied a little more heavily on, which was focused on the speed and flexibility adapting to dynamic tasks. With specific example to the Solomon Islands, the reason it's applicable is we were getting updated that events were occurring in Honiara. Hours later, those events had occurred, and then hours after that, they'd escalated further. 4 days before the recall to participate in the operation in the Solomon Islands, I just completed the Advanced Reconnaissance course in Singleton. It was my first formal learning opportunity commanding patrols in a dispersed and disparate operations, and little did I know that I'd be using those essential skills on operations a few days later. So the call to return to work came late on the evening of the 24th of November. Myself, along with the contingent commander being Captain Finlayson and my OC at the time, Major Charles, had the friction of putting together the platoon and task organising them. The 3RAR Bravo Company was concurrently mounting the RCT for a separate task, and the friction which this imposed on us was not having Recon and Snipers platoon organic to deploy. What it meant was we had to draw on soldiers from across Support Company to man the platoon. So the unit had an exceptional S2 who was keeping us updated every few hours throughout the day. We knew that the situation in Honiara was volatile, and we were lucky enough to have a number of veterans of the Solomon Islands in some of the more senior members of the battalion. Concurrently, they were able to keep us updated with context to the situation, which we knew was changing rapidly. As a junior commander, I like to think so. As I said previously, I'd had some fantastic opportunities in my first year as a lieutenant, commanding Recon and Snipers platoon and completing the Advanced Reconnaissance course. For my soldiers, I was lucky enough to draw them from across Support Company. Consequently, they were some of the best trained and most experienced soldiers in the battalion. My platoon sergeant, Trent McCafferty, and myself were supported and then tasked by our HQ. So we had to complete the routine tasks of mounting an operation: collecting live plates and ammunition, completing requisite paperwork, zeroing and preparing our weapons. From a command aspect, we had to choose our force element, ensure that it was appropriately qualified, and then task organise it. I was concurrently keeping the HQ updated and dealing with 5 metre targets, which consistently continued to arise. One example of this was when we found out that not everyone had the requisite training or qualifications on less lethal munitions. The way in which we solved this was a centralised brief. It was down and dirty, but it achieved the effect that we needed it to. Concurrently, Trent McCafferty, my platoon sergeant, was selecting and preparing specialist equipment and then making sure that we had a correct accounting for that equipment as we moved forward with the operation. As mentioned previously, we drew the soldiers from across the support company platoons, but heavily based on recon and snipers. The support platoon's abilities were well matched to the tasks that we had to complete. The maturity and experience expected of support company platoon members matched well with the section independent tasks which we had to execute. So we hadn't received any orders prior to arriving at RAF Townsville. As we were bombing up our magazines with live rounds, I drew some key intent from a conversation we had with Major General Elwood, who'd come to see us off. We knew that the situation in Honiara was volatile, but while the people were protesting against the government, it was unlikely that they would want to or would risk facing our call sign in any sort of confrontation. It was not until Lieutenant Colonel Frankel arrived at the Townsville air point of departure with the HQ 1 support and response team and provided his address that we had some intent and orders to work from. From there, I proceeded to sit on the concrete at RAF Townsville and develop my orders for 20 minutes, in which I incorporated my section commanders into the appreciation. We did our mission analysis and conducted our course of action analysis. And from there, I took a further 20 minutes to write the orders, at which point we were ready to board the plane and I proceeded to deliver the orders on the back of a crate as we flew to Honiara. It was specified from HQ JOC that the standing rules of engagement would be in place from the bilateral security treaty between Australia and the Solomon Islands. The method which we received this was a verbal brief the evening before we departed. It was very brief, it was very short, and didn't give the soldiers the confidence that they needed to execute. After backbriefing the CIO on my concerns, it took time out of his busy schedule to develop an orders for opening fire card, which every soldier carried with them. It provided them with the details of what to engage with and when, and provided them with greater level of confidence to execute. It was a detriment that we couldn't provide this for them earlier. We were lucky enough to have a number of supporting elements which allowed us to task organise the platoon. So organically from recon and snipers, we had a sniper pair. We also had a storeman and a fitter armourer from Thurariar Organic. In addition to that, we had a brick from 1MP Battalion, Alpha Company, and together we made the first element being the Infantry Protection Force of the Joint Task Group. The second element was capabilities out of 6th Brigade, with the third element being the medical support team out of the 4th Close Health Battalion. And we patrolled often with the third element being the medical team, and it led to a really strong bond between our two call signs. We're there to support the Australian Federal Police, who had a long-standing relationship with the Royal Solomon Island Police Force. Captain Finlayson was double-hatting as the liaison officer to the Australian Federal Police, assisting them with their commander's daily update and then providing that information back to the Joint Task Group. Our MPs also played a vital role in liaison, gaining information and context on the ground from the Australian Federal Police, and we provided something back to them by being the hard backstop in case of any emergency. We arrived early on the evening of the 26th of November. The riots had spread towards the President's personal residence, and we could see fires there and in Chinatown as we prepared to land. The PNGDF had arrived earlier in the afternoon and had secured Henderson Airfield and the terminal itself. The Cookram Highway between Honiara and Henderson Airfield was not secure when we arrived. Consequently, the CO's recon moved to a berth north of Henderson Airfield and moved by boat to the port of Honiara, where he conducted his liaison with the Australian Federal Police and the Royal Solomon Island Police Force. Concurrently, we secured the terminal for the conduct of our tasks ongoing, and the Defence Attaché was also there, exceptionally energetic, and had tied in with the Papua New Guinea Defence Force and the Royal Solomon Island Police Force. Without exception, fantastic. The Australian Federal Police had a long-standing relationship with the Solomon Islands Police Force and a really good understanding of the context on the ground. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade led Australia's response from the High Commission. We effectively worked for the head of mission, providing her with capability and options. We're a platoon of only 30 or so infantry soldiers. We're focused on getting out and being seen by the local community, the overwhelming response of which was positive. However, considering the riots were by the population against the government, we had a certain friction over perception management. We were there to support the government, but we were also there to support the people of the Solomon Islands. The amenities at Henderson Airfield were extremely limited. We took one side of the terminal and the Papua New Guinea Defence Force took the other. But the location did provide us with some benefits. The air point of departure provided us with a logistical lifeline back to Australia through our airline of communication. There had also been multiple break-ins on the airfield's perimeter, with the lights being deliberately damaged to stop planes landing by night. As we progressed, we needed to deter this from continuing. It took us a day or so to plan, with the majority of that planning being conducted by the HQ element, while we concurrently conducted our security tasks. The Australian Federal Police provided vehicles and the logistical support required for the move, and then vehicles for our tasks ongoing in and around Rove Police HQ. We used Rove as our forward operating base going forward. It provided us with enough space to barracks the force, stage the vehicles, and allowed HQ to have communications higher. So we moved into a different phase of the operation, with myself and my platoon sergeant setting up a tactical operations centre from where we could run the patrols out to conduct a variety of different tasks. The main effort was understanding the key infrastructure in the city. With the most dangerous course of action being the resumption of riots and fires, we knew that in that circumstance, we would be required to act to protect that critical infrastructure. Op Help and Friend was the transition in our operation that we had when we arrived at Rove Police HQ. It was about getting out into the local community, of which we had an amazing positive response. We were there to support the Solomon Islands government, but as I said, the people were overwhelmingly welcoming, and I've got no doubt that they remembered Australia's contribution to the regional assistance mission to the Solomon Islands in the early 2000s. We had information that another protest was going to occur at Parliament, the first sitting since the riots had begun. As a consequence, we planned Op Parliament and nested it within the Australian Federal Police and the Royal Solomon Island Police Force response. Our capability was to pre-position our forces to deter aggression at points of critical infrastructure, to pre-position medevac capabilities in case of emergency, and also to provide early warning to the AFP to provide them with options and primarily allow the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force to be the face of security at the Parliament itself. Not long after we arrived at Rove Police HQ, a platoon from the New Zealand Defence Force and the Republic of Fiji military forces arrived at Henderson Airfield. So the Republic of Fiji military forces took up security at Henderson Airfield. They're an exceptionally outgoing team, but needless to say, after having a conversation with some of the locals who'd been breaking in and damaging the lights, that there was no more risk to the integrity of the airfield. Our brothers from the New Zealand Defence Force were exceptionally proactive. They visited us many times at Rove HQ, and from there we integrated on our unmanned aerial system platform management and our logistical supply management. After the warning period which we had that resulted in Op Parliament, there was a number of other warning periods on which we were on high alert. As we moved later in December, it was unlikely that riots would flare up again until Parliament sat again, which was not until the new year. It was basically decided from there that an infantry platoon was no longer required to provide security and that a reinforced Australian Federal Police working from Rove HQ would be sufficient. From there, the headquarters from 1 division remained and provided the effects for Op Lilia, which is continuing even now. So we'd already worked together since mid-2021 when I took command of Recon and Snipers Platoon. He was a senior sergeant and had exceptional experience which we relied on. As we set up our Tactical Operations Centre, his significant experience in reconnaissance was invaluable. We set up and began operating our Tactical Operations Centre, which was very similar to a Recon Operations Centre. Having taught the employment of a Recon Operations Centre on the Advanced Reconnaissance course multiple times, this made for a smooth execution. A lot of the times throughout, it's hard to describe how much actually happened, but when I refer to we and our, it's always Trent and I sitting together and putting our heads together, and more often than not, me relying on his experience and advice. I had 6 corporals under my command in the Solomon Islands. Corporal Smith, Bjarnason and Woodham as section commanders. Corporal Whitford was the sniper pair commander and doubled as the PHQ corporal. We'd worked together in reconnaissance and sniper platoon throughout the year, and on the flip side, they knew what I was like as a leader and what to expect from me. We also had Corporal Gledhill from 1MP Alpha Company. She was an exceptional junior NCO who quickly earned the respect. The final corporal was Corporal Bull from the 4th Close Health Battalion. He was attached as our organic medic, and he did an exceptional job mentoring the combat first aiders prior to deployment, managing and mentoring them on deployment and when we returned to Australia. The opportunity to deploy was a culmination of my training so far. An understanding and respect of the level of preparedness and readiness required for operations is something I'll take with me moving forward in my career. I would have to remind him to train with the standard expected of operations. Too often in assessments, we're shooting for the satisfactory standard, some comfortable barracks routine, some comfortable PT, but we don't know how these standards will translate to operations. By training hard in all aspects, we'll better prepare ourselves to be ready for operations.